and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Rausum Pereira. First, let me inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, an initiative that will help each one of you transform the way you learn. It will help you in your competitive exams journey as well as prepare you for life itself and make you a better Bharatiya. You can go to our website kc.bharatafirst.com for more details. Register now and avail the limited period early bird discounts. Now, since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do share the content as well so that more people get to know about Bharata First. Follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and make a contribution. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. In case you have trouble with the UPI IDs, you may use the payment link in the description below. All you have to do is click on it and follow the steps. All this information along with some must-see recommendations are in the description of the video. Please go through it. Now on to the discussion. The second COVID wave and location-specific lockdowns in major states have dislocated supply chains even in rural areas, which is going to manifest in rising prices of essentials, SBI Research has said in its latest report. CPI inflation increased to 6.3% on yearly basis in May 21 as compared to 4.23% in April 21. This 200 basis points increase on yearly terms and 100 basis points increase in monthly terms is a matter of concern, said the SBI, I beg your pardon. Now, even small items are showing disproportionately larger increases. The SBI said rising food and commodity prices as well as localized lockdowns have led to a sharp increase in headline numbers. Core inflation also increased to 6.55%, and the last time it was seen around this level was in June 2014. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the rise in inflation. Joining me on the program today are Vinita Hariharan, public policy expert, Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, consulting editor of the Business Standard, and Ajay Shankar, former secretary, DIPP, Government of India. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Mr. Shankar, let me start the program with you first. On an earlier program of Big Picture, you spoke about how we shouldn't be too concerned about inflation and the RBI shouldn't be worrying too much about it right now. How would you look at the inflation figures and the inflation situation as it stands now?
The inflation situation is worrying because the latest numbers are certainly a cause of concern. But I would still stick to my earlier position that the RBI should not be in a hurry to start acting. So because the fact of the matter is that the economy is still not yet on any reasonable growth trajectory. And so whatever monetary easing and lowering of interest rates the RBI has done, I think it would be prudent for the RBI to stay the course. But the inflation is worrying, and so I think we need to probably try and think out of the box and see whether anything can be done about this inflationary trend, which is not the standard prescription of raising interest rates and reducing money supply. Now that's not easy but we are not in normal times. So how to think about it, how to try something? Because of course one view which is also prevalent is that this is a very short-term supply side constraint as a result of lockdowns all across India. The lockdowns are easing and things should get back to normal. So I hope they do, in which case, of course, this is 1 month or 2 months set of numbers and we could relax after a few months. So it's a difficult situation, not easy to predict which way things would go.
Absolutely. Vinita Hariharan, let me bring you to the picture now. How would you look at the entire inflation scenario at this point in time? Because the public at large seems to be concerned and is worried, and any rise in prices is going to hurt the public as a whole. There is a lot of noise being created as far as the rise in petrol prices and oil prices are concerned as well. And the masses don't want to burn a hole in their pockets.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Frank, for having me over again. And yeah, the inflation is worrisome. It's hovering at 6%, like Ajay Shankarji just mentioned. And it's, I think, across the globe, it's one of the highest. We share this, the highest ranks amongst all many other countries. I mean, a few other countries like in Africa and all these, they are hovering around this benchmark. So it is pretty high. It's also beyond the inflation targeting regime that is set by the RBI. But as Shankarji just mentioned, it's also because of the supply chain, the transitory supply chain constraints that we are facing because of the lockdowns and curfews, etc. So now we are in a window between waves, so to speak, in the COVID parlance. So this is when it's eased out, when supply has eased out, and also with a pending positive projections of the monsoon coming in and good agricultural production, boosting of the agriculture production, and also the large amount of funding that's gone, liquidity that's gone into MSMEs from the government. Giving due credit to the government, they have infused a lot of liquidity, substantial liquidity into MSMEs. So we would see MSMEs also coming out of the red, so to speak, and so we will see a gradual, I think, increase in manufacturing and productivity improvement. So we will see an easing of the inflation coming, very soon. And it was just mentioned, repo rate, is not the only solution. So it's good for the RBI to hang on and look at how we can ease the supply chain. That's where the constraint lies in supply chain in the short term. We need to look at how we can improve the supply chain mechanisms. And in the long run, I think we have to go towards strengthening local economic development. I think that would be the answer to live in pandemic times, so to speak, which local economic development would mean trying to source raw materials from, within a range of 10 to 15 kilometers from your residence. And so you don't have to travel so much to get the, raw materials. And so to reduce the dependence on supply chains, I think is a mode that we need to go to in the long run and move towards sustainable development of communities.
Absolutely. Shubhamoy, let me bring you in now. So, you know, what is the big picture that is really emerging out of all these numbers and these figures right now? Because, like has been mentioned already by the two panelists on the program, that the numbers are worrisome and the people are concerned. The public as a whole is really concerned with the situation at hand. So, what is the big picture that is emerging out of these figures?
Very interesting to listen to both Vinita ji and Ajay. They put some very, very, very strong points. And I quite agree with quite a bit of those. However, I'm of late, while initially at one stage when we were discussing inflation, we were looking at it as possibly a short-term phenomena, and as Mr. Ajay pointed out, that the supply side smoothening out should ease out inflation. I am getting a bit more worried, and the reason for getting worried is that the amount of liquidity, which Nitaji pointed out, is coming into the economy is very huge. Let me give an example. She talked about MSME sector, where the government has added the CJLS. Now, whether it's going to the right or the not so right guys, the point is the money is going. The second part is RBI has just transferred 1 lakh crore rupees to the government. Now, remember, this is not against any borrowing. It is simply money created by RBI being transferred to the government. So it is actually almost like printing money. 1 lakh crore. That's a huge amount. And if you look at this year's MSP rice, let me just give you some numbers here. Mustard has gone up by 65%. in the 5 years, of course, Chana has gone up 60%, the MSPs since 2014-15. But hang on, most of those rises, even for paddy, has gone up by 37.35%, moon by 56%. Most of those rises have happened in the past 2020 and the 2021. This is a solid amount of money that is going into the rural economy. You and I can quibble about whether the right people are getting it. That is a different issue altogether. But when we look at the big picture, it is liquidity going into the economy. A huge amount of money going into the economy. And this money is going to be spent. It is not about whether the right, again, I will put in the caveat, that's not about whether the bottom 20% is getting it or not. That's not the issue here. The point is the money is going in. And it's going in at a solid amount. If you look at last year's, even if we take the adjustment of the government that it did for the 9.7 fiscal deficit, if you say about 1.7 was basically clearing past dues, there was still 2% extra which the government pumped in. This year's borrowing, and the borrowing is going to rise with the shortfall in GST. We are talking about a massive infusion of liquidity going into the economy. I do not expect that this money can be sloshing around and will be mopped up even with the correction of the supply. The supply will correct, the supply will come into stream. I quite agree with what Ajay is saying. But despite all that, there is going to be a substantial rise in inflation. And that is because of this huge money that's coming in. Not only that, going ahead, as we all consider the welfare measures are needed, in fact, they have not even been announced, excepting the 5 kilo per head, which the government has done. And there are already indications that there will be several more, which essentially means more money going into the system. I'm absolutely sure that inflation is going to be extremely high coming up in the Indian economy. And that's just the first set of thoughts that I'd like to leave you with.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think this is a very interesting point that Mr. Bhattacharjee has put forward. Mr. Shankar, I'd like to take that forward with you. Too much money in the system is also not good because it leads to more inflation. And what's eventually going to happen to this money? How would you look at this?
In fact, I would also like to add to the thoughts about being concerned the way things may unfold. We may be on the cusp of generating inflationary expectations in the economy, in which case it will become even more difficult to control inflation. And the worst case scenario would be a phenomenon called stagflation, where you have high inflation and hardly any growth. So clearly the challenges in handling the economy today are very difficult. Now coming more specifically to the extra money that is floating around, so far one is not seeing that translate itself into demand for macro numbers and therefore firms seeing increase in capacity utilization, etc. If that happens and with some inflation, I would still say it's probably a good thing because then firms will start thinking of investing in new capacity. I don't think we are anywhere there as yet. So one way forward would be, in my view, for government to move in rather aggressively with a demand stimulus in ways in which you generate demand for the right kind of people and also absorb the money sloshing around in the investment which that demand generation would require, which is really picking up the 100 lakh crore infrastructure pipeline projects, pick up the low-hanging fruit, invite bids, get them out in the market, separately have the development financial institution functioning quickly, provide credit, etc., etc. But the other thing which is a very unorthodox thought, but I certainly would like to put it on the table, is to see where you can move in from the fiscal side or from the government side to make micro kind of interventions which may moderate inflation and inflationary expectations. Now, to me, the most obvious thing to do is to lower the excesses and excise duties on petrol and diesel. I mean, if you do that with a big bang, inflationary expectations will come down, actual inflation would come down. Now, government would have to forego the revenue that it is generating. But I think if you ask me, there is a trade-off between a higher fiscal deficit because of the loss of revenue from the cesses on petrol and diesel, or the inflationary expectations and the actual inflation that is taking place. I mean, I'd be inclined to vote for higher deficit and lowering of taxes on petrol and diesel. Because the other cost push inflation, which is increase of MSPs, is something which is there, and it is not, I think, politically feasible to roll it back or moderate it. In fact, one of the political lessons which the government seems to have learned is that not increasing MSP is perhaps not such a good idea. And if you recall, about 10 years back, a lot of the inflation was being driven by very liberal increases in MSP and therefore food inflation. So this bit of food inflation, I think, is something we have to probably live with. I mean, one modest initiative to import pulses to moderate inflation again faced some headwinds saying, no, no, farmers deserve a better price. So I think the space, in my view, where government can and should seriously consider acting is a drastic lowering of the cesses on petrol and diesel. People would be happy, the price at the petrol pump would come down, and so the inflationary expectations would at least go for the time being. And I think that's the best. And the other, of course, is generating demand so that the money that is sloshing around starts shifting towards investment, or creating demand for something where capacity utilization is low rather than for things where it's pushing inflation.
Absolutely. Now, since we are here and we are discussing about, ways of getting out of this mess, Vinita Hariharan, let me come back to you now and talk about ideas. Mr. Shankar spoke about it in his opening remarks. He said it's time for us to think out of the box. You too mentioned that in your opening remarks as well. We can't have the run-of-the-mill kind of exercises today. So, what else can we do right now?
Yeah, so absolutely. So, yeah, I think out of the box solutions, innovation is required now. And I think the pandemic is something that we have to live with now. And so I think we have done with the periods of lockdowns, the series of lockdowns that we've had. So the government should really not consider lockdowns as a strategy anymore, I would feel. And we should have like, okay, this time we've kind of innovated on the last time's lockdown strategies, and we've given it the freedom to the states to have localized curfews and localized lockdowns. That's a step further. But going further, I think we should ease out these restrictions during a pandemic, and only lockdown activities which are absolutely which are not ESMA, so to speak, and also continue with the supply chain. The supply chain should not be constrained even during a pandemic. And now with the vaccines picking up pace, I think that's another, of course, a focus area of the government, as they are already doing it, vaccinating people. And so we brace ourselves towards, during this pandemic, because this is a pandemic-infused inflation. So the way out is to, have economic activities that are designed around the pandemic. In the sense, you move manufacturing from more interactive to distance chains. And for example, automobile sector, they can now come up with more, designs for personalized vehicles, which can be used during pandemics. And also in the entire manufacturing or in the MSME space, there needs to be this kind of a protocol in place for manufacturing. So if that is set in place, we don't really need to close down manufacturing and close down a supply chain and logistics sector. And otherwise, the investments from the government side is there towards the infrastructure building up of the nation, national infrastructure pipeline, and there's a monetization. We're all going the right track there. But I think the private sector also needs to come in more with their investment part into the infrastructure building for the nation. So that's another area where we need to focus on. Because I think out of the box would be how we could design our economic activities around this pandemic and reorient our manufacturing processes to live in the pandemic times. For example, service sectors such as tourism, which is so badly affected, hospitality is so badly affected in the pandemic. So they need to know how to reorient their products to service during COVID times as well. Like we did it last time, even I think this time, a lot of hotels were converted to hospital beds. And so these kind of, I think, so it's toggling between various uses of their products will have to be thought of. And tourism also, they've been quite innovative now in terms of going online with their with the culture and heritage aspects of the country, and then probably then look at booking slots for post-pandemic season and advertise their resorts or their products online. And so these are the kind of out-of-the-box solutions, I think. And as far as food inflation is concerned, as Ajay Shankarji just mentioned, I think there's been a lot of demand for COVID nutritious food like protein rich foods, and so there needs to be a focus on meat and poultry production as well, and protein rich foods. I think that's another focus area which we need to focus on, which will again bring down the rise of prices in these items.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shubhoy, coming back to you now, I'm going to go back to a point that Mr. Shankar was making about stagflation, and all signs are that that's what the economy is actually going through right now. Inflation numbers are in front of us. We are discussing that. Growth rate is also, extremely poor. We are in the minus, and job creation is a problem. We've seen youth around the country talking about how jobs are not being created for them. They are taking to social media and other platforms as well to talk about this and are being quite vociferous about it too. So is the economy already there, or is stagflation now going to be a reality?
I mean, Frank, inflation is definitely there, and we'll come to it in a minute. I don't think growth is going to sort of taper off. I mean, all indications are showing that the growth is actually going to rise. It is not going to be as high as it was initially expected, but it definitely would be 9.5, 10, and that is something not to be scoffed at. Remember, inflation itself also gives push to growth. So there will be those sort of things. But the big point is the Indian government, the state governments, none of them have so far put money in the productive sectors for the long term. I mean, that is going to come. So industrial investment and impact of those will be seen later in the medium term. Right now, the money that has been put by all the governments, whether in terms of helping in the COVID cases or whether for the other sectors, you talked of unemployment among the youth. So obviously there's going to be some, helping out of them. All of these are going to essentially push sustainability. That is what the governments will be most scared about. They've got elections coming up and all this sort of stuff. When that sort of a thing happens, essentially we are again going in for major amount of cash coming into the economy. See, this is where it's not a chicken and egg situation. The point is that the money that the government will be pushing at all stages. Tamil Nadu has already started giving out supplies. Bengal has promised a UBI. There are other states which will fall in line as soon as they are out of the COVID impact. All of these are essentially going to push the money up, the money supply in the economy, and it is getting pushed up already. If you look at the difference between WPI and CPI, what's happening is now that the WPI roughly, which reflects food, reflects fuel and all those things, has risen up because of the fuel impact. But very soon the CPI, which is actually lower at 6.3 and WPI is at 12, that gap is going to be caught up. So CPI is going to rise, which means the food inflation is going to now catch up with the WPI. Once that happens, we are in, as Ajay was rightly pointing out, a situation of inflationary expectations. And this is a very big challenge which RBI cannot handle by simply cutting interest rates, raising interest rates. Because if it does so, then essentially you are hitting at the productive sectors. G was talking about in giving incentives to the necessary productive sectors. So you are not able to cut interest rates. You're not able to raise interest rates. The money supply is coming in, and money supply needs to come in given the fact that so many millions of people have gone below the poverty line. So where does this leave inflation looking at? I suspect, given the impact of all of these things, inflation right now higher will actually, it'll slightly tamp down in May and in June and July because of the lockdown impact. But very soon it'll pick up again. It'll pick up again, and this time the pickup will be, I mean, you can call it like the second wave or the third wave of the COVID. The inflation wave is going to be very high. And this inflation wave, frankly speaking, is going to immediately pull in demand for larger MGI and REGA supply, because governments will be forced to provide employment for those people. So even if it doesn't raise the wages, it'll have to create a larger pool of workforce, which means larger amount of supply of work in the rural areas. There's already a demand for similar sort of thing in urban areas. So you can see where the narrative is going. It's a very dangerous narrative on inflation that is taking shape. And given the fact that the public mood is short, it is obviously, I mean, it's inflammable. COVID has created enormous damage. I frankly speak, the inflation story right now that is shaping up is probably going to be much worse than we have seen for several decades. And this is going to be a huge challenge, which will not allow for very easy solutions.
Absolutely. Talking about solutions, now time to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Mr. Shankar.
I would reiterate, bring petrol and diesel into GST as a medium-term goal, lower the cesses drastically, so the retail level, it comes down to 80 rupees. That will be a kind of shock signal, which would dampen inflationary expectations certainly for a few months. And hopefully by that time, the economy starts coming back to normal, some of the other investments start taking place. We are able to also identify other supply side constraints through micro kind of analysis to find where inflation has occurred because of some bottlenecks in the supply side and address that so that those things are not there. And in some areas, import stuff, I mean, the old days, sugar used to be imported, released in the market, pulses would be imported, released in the market. So find where government can act and release stuff in the market so that, I mean, even if the CPI numbers are higher, the ordinary people don't feel the pinch. Because there is a school of thought, which I think is also going to get some more traction, that maybe 6% inflation is probably better for growth and people of India can live with it. On balance, it's better, and the much lower inflation target is maybe not such a good idea. The debate will, I think, re-emerge in the coming months.
Absolutely. Vinita Hariharan.
Yeah, so my take would be, of course, easing the supply chain barriers is already recognized by the RBI on an urgent measure, and exempt supply chains from lockdowns and curfews and make it an essential essential activity to boost the economy, and not let that get affected by, even if we have a third wave. And thirdly would be, as mentioned earlier, innovative ways of working around the pandemic and looking at reorienting our economic activities to live with the pandemic. And of course, the sustainable long run measure would be sustainable local economic development and to source raw materials from distances which are not so difficult to negotiate or navigate.
Absolutely. And Shubham, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I would say at this stage, what we do not want is for any of the regulatory agencies, and that includes the government, to do a slip up. In the sense, governance issues, honesty of data, and clarity of communication has to be very important at this stage. It's a very difficult situation that we are entering in the economy, and at this stage, you would not want any sudden collapse in some part of the economy, big industrial dampener in terms of some company coming asunder because of reports of extreme malfeasance. These can be huge problems for the government to be able to put the economy back. These are not inflationary issues, but these actually tend to come to light whenever there's such tightrope walking comes in. So it's very important for regulatory agencies to be able to show that they are on the ball. That's important.
I think that's a very, very valid point that you made at the end there, because I hope that nothing untoward happens in the days to come, and we don't see any more of those Mehul Choksi kind of episodes, because that's the last thing that we need at this point in time right now, because that will deal a major blow to the economy and to the sentiment as a whole. All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. So, what's coming out of this discussion is that inflation is a major concern. What's even more worrying is too much liquidity in the system, which is likely to see a further rise in inflation. That having been said, the RBI should not follow the run of the mill exercises to bring down inflation. Lowering repo rate is not the only solution. We have to think of innovative ways. For a start, petrol and diesel prices can be lowered by reducing the cess and taxes. This will bring about immediate relief. The entire supply chain mechanism needs to be strengthened and can be categorized as essential services. Finally, we have to ensure that there are no slip ups from the government agencies and regulators. The last thing that we need right now is something like the PNB scam. It will deal a major blow to the system and sentiment as a whole. Now, before I go, let me once again inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, an initiative that will help each one of you transform the way you learn. You can go to our website kc.bharatafirst.com for more details and have a look at what we have to offer at the Knowledge Center. It's a learning experience like never before, and it will help you not only in your competitive exams journey, but will prepare you as a better human being and as a better Bharatiya. Register now and avail the limited period early bird offer. It is for a limited period, so go to kc.bharatafirst.com and register now. Thank you once again for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. I need it now more so than ever. In case you have some trouble with UPI IDs, you can use the payment link in the description box below. Just click on it and follow the steps. All this information, along with some must-see recommendations, are in the description below. Please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.